The Shadow War. In cities where millions wake to the buzz of traffic, where children race past corner stores and families gather in parks, most people never notice the invisible conflict unfolding just beyond their line of sight. It is not a conventional battlefield. There are no uniformed soldiers or official declarations. Yet every day, in neighborhoods from New York to Los Angeles, a hidden war is being waged by groups whose influence seeps into communities like smoke from a smoldering fire. These organizations are not armies sanctioned by governments. They are underground networks built on loyalty, fear, and absolute control. Their ranks stretch across borders, prisons, and entire generations. And for decades, they have shaped a dark chapter of American criminal history. To understand how these groups gain such a grip on society, we must begin with the one that law enforcement officials still name among the most violent and unpredictable forces ever encountered, a gang whose roots began far from American soil. Their story reveals how a group of displaced youths grew into a sprawling criminal empire, transforming crimes of desperation into acts of calculated brutality and exporting chaos into the heart of the United States. The origins can be traced to Central America during a period where civil unrest tore communities apart. In El Salvador, civil war created a landscape where violence was normal and survival was the only currency. Thousands fled north seeking safety, but the trauma they carried did not disappear at the border. In the streets of Los Angeles, immigrant teenagers who lacked identity, stability, and support gravitated toward others just like them. With no adults guiding them and no institution protecting them, they built their own social structure, one stitched together with symbols, territory, and fear. This would eventually become known nationwide as a criminal organization whose name could silence a room, Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13. At first, the group was little more than a loose brotherhood. Members bonded over shared experiences, language, and heritage. They listened to heavy metal music, tagged public walls, and defended each other from rival neighborhoods. But as more members joined, something began to shift. The young men who once saw themselves as outcasts realized they possessed a unique advantage. They were united by survival, fearlessness, and a past soaked in violence. What started as a shield soon sharpened into a weapon. During the 1980s and 1990s, the United States government intensified deportations, sending anyone with criminal charges back to Central America. What officials failed to anticipate was a consequence of scattering trained and ruthless gang members into regions already destabilized by conflict. In El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, these deportees were no longer teenagers searching for identity. They were fully formed criminals returning to countries too weakened to resist. This multiplication effect created a cycle of violence that would boomerang back into American cities with devastating power. By the time MS-13 re-established itself on American soil, the gang no longer resembled its early form. It had rules, rituals, hierarchies, and violent punishments for disobedience. Tattoos became more than decoration. They were insignias that served as warnings. Members wore symbols like badges, each one a declaration of allegiance. Where once they were ignored, now they commanded fear. They expanded their ranks with precision, recruiting from schools, parks, and neighborhoods where after-school programs are being cut and young people face an empty void. Soon their presence reached New York, Long Island, and suburban areas that once believed gang activity happened only in distant cities. A misconception formed that MS-13 was interested solely in drug trafficking or petty crime. But authorities discovered something far more unsettling. The gang was not merely a business. It was a belief system. Members did not kill to profit. They killed to prove loyalty, to cement bonds, and to remind outsiders that power did not come from money but from terror. Law enforcement agencies tracked the rising body count. Stunned as crime scenes became more savage. Investigators found that victims were sometimes targeted simply because of appearance, clothing, or markings interpreted as belonging to rivals. One incident shook a Queens community after a teenager was found lifeless, murdered because gang members misread his tattoos. The boy had no affiliation. He was simply at the wrong place, caught in the crosshairs of a world he didn't belong to. This inability to distinguish threat from innocence exposed the gang's most terrifying trait. They operated without hesitation. Violence was not the result of disputes or business motives. It was embedded into their culture. Prosecutors began linking them to dozens of murders across a decade, discovering patterns of brutality that stunned even hardened investigators. Each crime was meant to reinforce a singular message. Once the gang marked you as a target, reason did not matter and negotiation was impossible. Communities caught in the storm faced a dilemma. Many residents were immigrants who feared speaking to authorities. Families who fled violence in their home countries were now confronted by a version of the same terror in the United States. To them, reporting crimes felt like picking between two threats, each one capable of retaliation. Silence became survival strategy, and that silence allowed the organization to grow thick roots beneath the surface. Even as law enforcement began cracking down with specialized units and federal task forces, MS-13 adapted. When prisons were supposed to weaken their influence, the opposite happened. Correctional facilities became recruitment centers. Behind locked doors, gang leaders communicated orders, extorted inmates, and coordinated operations outside prison walls. The more isolated they became, the more loyal their members felt. In a world where identity was currency, joining could feel like a lifeline. Leaving was a death sentence. The gang's expansion did not go unnoticed. Newspapers, analysts, and politicians pointed to their rising numbers and geographic spread. However, focusing on their ferocity alone distracted from something far more important. MS-13 was not a spontaneous phenomenon. It was a symptom. Every gap in public systems, from broke school programs to overcrowded detention centers, acted as breeding grounds. For every rise in recruitment, there was a failure somewhere, a missing mentor, an absent opportunity, or an ignored warning sign. Yet despite federal indictments, police raids, and multiple arrests, the gang refused to dissolve. Members replaced fallen leaders, territories shifted, and violence became cyclical. The story of MS-13 revealed one haunting truth. A criminal network does not need skyscrapers, corporate logos, or official titles to wield influence. All it needs is fear, desperation, and a society that looks away long enough for shadows to become monsters. As this hidden conflict unfolded, another force emerged from a different corner of American history. While MS-13 was shaped by immigration and war, another group formed long before it, sparked by rivalry, identity, and fractured communities. Their colors alone could trigger confrontation. Their existence disrupted the cultural equilibrium of Los Angeles, embedding chaos into neighborhoods and creating a divide that would last generations. Their presence would ignite one of the most infamous turf wars the United States had ever seen. Their story marks the next stage of this hidden war. And while MS-13 spread like wildfire, this rival feud smoldered for decades, creating a legacy of blood and loyalty that refused to die. The color of territory. Long before the public recognized MS-13 as a national threat, Los Angeles was already simmering with tension. The city's sprawling neighborhoods, defined by highways, industrial zones, and segregated housing projects, were fertile ground for a conflict that would shape American gang culture for half a century. The youth who grew up in these spaces inherited more than poverty. They inherited boundaries. Invisible lines carved through streets, schools, alleys, and parks, teaching generations that identity was not chosen. It was assigned by geography, loyalty, and fear. In the late 1960s, the city was undergoing a transformation. Civil rights movements surged through the country, sparking hope in some communities and anxiety in others. But in Los Angeles, where jobs vanished and public trust eroded, hope struggled to take root. Many young people found themselves caught in neighborhoods where police protection was inconsistent, fathers were absent, and opportunities were scarce. To survive, they banded together. What started as alliances for safety hardened into factions capable of extreme violence. This simmering pressure birthed two forces that will become legendary. Their names alone could split a room. Their colors became warnings. Their feud, one that began with schoolyard altercations and territorial disputes, would grow into a defining chapter of American crime history. They called themselves the Crips. The Crips started as a neighborhood club formed by a charismatic young man who believed unity could empower local youths. At first, they were not an army or criminal syndicate. They wore blue, not as a declaration of war, but as a symbol of belonging. Yet the rapid spread of their influence, combined with a fiercely competitive mindset, made them a threat to anyone who refused allegiance. Small groups that once policed their own blocks suddenly saw themselves surrounded. Those who resisted were confronted with force. And force, once introduced, became permanent. The Crips grew quickly, engulfing neighborhoods across Los Angeles like an unstoppable tide. Their aggressive expansion frightened other groups who believed the Crips were no longer defending community interests but conquering territory. Fear turned into desperation. Desperation turned into retaliation. In Compton, a group of youths who were tired of losing friends, tired of running, and tired of watching neighborhoods fall into Crip dominance, made a decision that would alter American gang history forever. They organized not as individuals, but as a coalition. They gathered different local factions, groups with different histories, different leaders, and different grudges, and united them under one banner. Their identity would be defined by a single, unmistakable symbol, the color red. They became the Bloods. This new alliance did not form to build a criminal empire. It formed to survive. Their creation was a direct response to being hunted. Their recruitment was fueled not by ideology but necessity. But survival-driven choices often snowball into consequences no one anticipates. Once the Bloods established themselves, the rivalry was no longer about isolated fights. It became a philosophy of existence. Every altercation fed the narrative that the other side was not merely dangerous. They were the enemy. The early days of the Blood and Crip conflict were chaotic. The gangs battled over parks, apartment complexes, intersections, even hallways of public schools. What began as turf disputes evolved into personal feuds, and personal feuds transformed into cultural inheritance. A new generation emerged who did not question the war. They did not need history lessons. They only needed colors to tell them who to trust and who to fear. Red meant blood, blue meant Crip, and the wrong choice could be fatal. As the city fractured under these colors, authorities underestimated the magnitude of what was unfolding. Many dismissed it as youth disobedience or isolated scuffles. They focused on locking up individuals, never realizing they were inadvertently creating a system that strengthened the gangs. Every imprisoned member became a recruiter. Every punishment became a badge of honor. The prison walls meant to isolate criminals, instead concentrated and refined gang identity. By the 1970s, the Bloods and Crips evolved into structured organizations. They created hierarchies, rituals, and initiation requirements. Their hand signs, symbols, and coded language flowed through schools and streets like folklore. Teenagers who once dreamt of escaping poverty now dreamed of owning stripes, rising in rank, and gaining respect. Identity was no longer based on personal achievement. It was earned through loyalty, reputation, and violence. Then came the moment that escalated everything beyond local control. The arrival of crack cocaine turned turf into currency. Drug dealers realized corners were not just street intersections, they were profitable territories. The gangs that controlled these corners controlled entire neighborhoods. Every block became worth fighting for. Every confrontation added another name to a growing list of casualties. For some, killing became business. For others, it became initiation. The younger you were when you pulled the trigger, the more respect you owned. Violence stopped being a last resort. It became the language of power. As the drug epidemic worsened, the Bloods and Crips built networks stretching beyond Los Angeles. Older members who served prison time were relocated to other states, unknowingly acting as seeds of expansion. Soon, these gangs were no longer West Coast phenomena. They had roots in New York, the South, the Midwest, and on military bases overseas. The conflict that began over neighborhood pride became a nationwide blueprint for gang identity. But this war, despite its notoriety, wasn't solely defined by numbers or body counts. Its most devastating impact was psychological. In some communities, children learned the color code before they learned the alphabet. They were taught to distrust strangers, avoid certain blocks, and never wear the wrong shade of clothing. Their worldview was shaped not by dreams but by survival tactics. And when survival is a primary goal, hope becomes an abstract concept. Still, the Blood and Crip rivalry was only one phase of America's evolving criminal ecosystem. Some gangs developed from poverty, others from immigration trauma, and some from fractured communities. But one gang existed for a very different reason. It grew not from desperation, but ideology. It fed on hatred like fuel, recruiting through beliefs rather than opportunity. Its origin was not the street, it was a prison, and its purpose was far more sinister. Behind steel bars, where the state believed that it contained the most dangerous individuals, A different kind of organization was forming. Its members did not hide their purpose. They embraced it. They celebrated it. They wore symbols that echoed one of history's darkest chapters and demanded a price for entry: blood. It called itself the Aryan Brotherhood. Unlike the Bloods and Crips, whose rivalries were born from territory and identity, the Aryan Brotherhood was driven by ideology, control, and violence without hesitation. Their existence transformed prisons into laboratories for organized crime, and soon their reach extended beyond walls meant to contain them. Their membership requirements made them infamous, their methods made them feared, and their belief system made them deadly. The Brotherhood would go on to influence prisons and streets alike, creating alliances with other criminal enterprises and reshaping how gangs operated behind bars. Their rise was not a reaction, it was an assertion. They saw themselves not as a gang, but as enforcers of a supremacist worldview. And though smaller in number than other organizations, they left behind a body count that dwarfed their size. According to investigators, they were responsible for a disproportionately high percentage of prison murders. In their world, violence wasn't a tool. It was a gateway to acceptance. The story of American gangs had evolved from survival to identity to ideology, each chapter more vicious than the last. Yet the tale was far from over. Other forces were emerging, global, strategic, and exponentially more sophisticated. They didn't rely on street corners or hand signs. They relied on business fronts, international networks, and financial laundering so complex that governments struggled to untangle it. These new players weren't just gangs. They were empires masquerading as corporations, and some of them had histories predating every American organization combined. Next comes a force whose influence once crossed oceans, infiltrated financial systems, and manipulated industries as effortlessly as street gangs traded territory. They were not defined by colors, but by codes. Their loyalty was ritualistic. Their silence was legendary. Their reach was global. Their name? The Yakuza, global shadows in the evolution of crime. By the time the 1980s had faded into the 1990s, the landscape of organized crime in the United States was no longer a story limited to streets, alleys, or neighborhood boundaries. What had begun with local turf wars had expanded into a complex network of criminal influence that spanned prisons, suburbs, and even foreign countries. Gangs had learned to adapt, to survive, and to thrive amid law enforcement pressure. The next stage of this evolution involved organizations whose methods were more sophisticated, whose reach was global, and whose vision extended far beyond the immediate violence of street-level conflict. Among these was a group whose reputation for precision, secrecy, and discipline rivaled that of any corporate boardroom. The Yakuza, Japan's infamous organized crime syndicate, had existed for centuries, but by the late 20th century, its influence had crept quietly into the United States. Unlike street gangs driven by survival or ideology, the Yakuza operated like business executives with deadly consequences. Money laundering, human trafficking, and illegal enterprises became their primary tools, executed with the meticulous care of a global corporation. Law enforcement agencies, unprepared for such an organized threat, struggled to trace the flow of funds or anticipate the syndicate's next move. Their operations were stealthy, their reach invisible, and their discipline unmatched. When the Obama administration froze the American assets of Yakuza leaders, it was a rare moment of success. Yet even then, the system proved resilient. Replacements emerged, ensuring continuity of operations across continents. While the Yakuza focused on strategic control and profit, other gangs continued to dominate through brute force and intimidation. In California, the Mexican Mafia evolved from a prison protection group into one of the most powerful Hispanic criminal organizations in the country. Its origins in the late 1950s at dual vocational institution had a simple premise: protect fellow inmates. But by the 1960s, this protective circle had transformed into a machine for extortion, gambling, and drug trafficking. Over the next few decades, the gang expanded outside the prison system, forming alliances with street gangs in East Los Angeles and consolidating a criminal empire that rivaled even the most feared syndicates. In 1995, the FBI used the RICO Act to dismantle significant parts of the organization, yet the Mafia simply reformed, proving the resilience of a network rooted in loyalty and fear. Further south, the Barrio Azteca established itself as a dominant force along the U.S.-Mexico border. Operating primarily in Texas, the gang became infamous not just for drug trafficking, but for murder, torture, and human smuggling. Its alliances with cartels made it powerful, yet its enmities with other criminal organizations also fueled its deadly reputation. The line between gang and cartel blurred, as Barrio Azteca operated with both the precision of a syndicate and the brutality of a street-level criminal enterprise. In communities like El Paso, the gang's influence was a constant, unseen pressure, an omnipresent shadow that dictated behavior, curtailed freedom, and instilled fear. Meanwhile, motorcycle clubs that had once been viewed as rebellious subcultures developed into criminal powerhouses. The Hells Angels, founded in California in 1948, evolved from a brotherhood of motorcyclists into a criminal organization involved in methamphetamine production and distribution. Their notoriety, fueled by violent barroom brawls and brutal initiations, attracted national attention. Yet even as their public image softened through charitable work and media portrayals, the roots of their criminal operations remained intact. Similarly, the Mongols Motorcycle Club, formed in 1969, became synonymous with racialized violence and ruthless territorial expansion. Despite their relatively smaller size compared to the Hells Angels, their aggressive tactics and ferocity of their gang wars earned them a fearsome reputation across California and beyond. Gangs like the Simon City Royals in Chicago and the Black Spades in the Bronx exemplified how community origins, ideology, and culture could intertwine with crime to produce enduring organizations. The Royals, formed in 1952, grew through merger and turf wars, maintaining a presence in both prisons and urban territories for decades. The Black Spades, beginning as politically inspired youth group, eventually succumbed to the pull of street-level crime before reinventing themselves in the 21st century as a community service organization. Their trajectory illustrates the duality of gangs: destruction and renewal, violence and social influence, fear and community structure. By the 2000s, the U.S. had become a mosaic of organized criminal influence. Some groups maintained hyperlocal dominance, others operated like shadow corporations with international reach. Yet all shared common traits: loyalty enforced through violence, identity cemented through rituals, and survival guaranteed by fear. For law enforcement, the challenge had evolved beyond tracking individual criminals. Investigators now face a multi-layered network where prisons, neighborhoods, borders, and global markets intersected. Arrest one member, and 10 more rose to fill the void. Raid one territory, and new methods emerge to exploit the law's blind spots. The fight against organized crime had become an endless game of adaptation. Even today, these organizations continue to evolve. MS-13's influence spanned communities far beyond its original enclaves. The Bloods and Crips still patrol neighborhoods with colors that mark generations of loyalty and conflict. The Aryan Brotherhood maintains its lethal prison networks. The Mexican Mafia and Barrio Azteca remain embedded in both prisons and streets. International syndicates like the Yakuza and remnants of the Hells Angels operate across borders, blending legitimate enterprise with illicit control. And yet, each gang, whether local, national, or global, shares a single unifying principle: power is survival, and survival is absolute. The story of these gangs is not simply one of criminals and victims. It is a story of society's blind spots, of communities that fail to protect their own, of children who inherit fear before opportunity. It is a story of how marginalized groups, ideological extremists, and opportunistic organizations can seize control when the structures meant to safeguard society falter. Violence, control, and influence are the threads that weave a tapestry of organized crime, stretching from the streets of New York to the back alleys of Los Angeles, from the walls of prisons to boardrooms abroad. Understanding these groups requires more than headlines. It demands recognition of the complex, interlocking systems that sustain them. It requires acknowledgement that while law enforcement can arrest individuals, they cannot immediately dismantle an entire culture of fear. And it demands awareness that organized crime is not static. It grows, adapts, and reasserts itself wherever weakness is found. As the final curtain falls on this chapter of American gang history, one truth stands out above all else. Organized crime is not just a relic of the past. It is a living, evolving entity, shaped by survival, loyalty, ideology, and opportunity. And while society continues to confront it, The shadow wars persist, often unseen, always dangerous, and forever a part of the American landscape. As the shadows of these gangs continue to stretch across cities, prisons, and even borders, one thing is clear: the story of crime is never static. It evolves, it adapts, and the search for truth never ends. If you want to stay informed about the most chilling true crime stories, uncover the hidden layers of criminal networks, and follow the dark truths lurking behind the headlines, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we dive deep into the crimes, the investigations, and the untold stories that you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe now and never miss a story from the shadows. The end.